For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Samantha Moorman. Malaika Wa Azania is a self-proclaimed Pan-Africanist, activist and socialist who, at 22, is taking to task South Africa's leaders with some thought-provoking ideologies. She joins me now to discuss her first book, Memoirs of a Born Free. It's interesting to me that you title your book Memoirs of a Born Free. Do you consider yourself a born free, or do you problematize and perhaps reject the notion?
I certainly reject the notion. I certainly do. Even in the book, I speak about how I feel that the term born free is a false thesis. The entire narrative around what born frees are is itself a false thesis. I don't believe that there is such a group of people called born frees, at least not black. I think if there are born frees, certainly it must be with young white people. White people have always been born free. I don't know if we can say the same thing about black people, particularly even with our generation. I think that in as much as we may have been born, whether it's post this democratic dispensation or just at the dawn of this democratic dispensation, it can't be true that black people or young blacks like myself are born free. Some of the constructs that defined apartheid South Africa continue to define post-apartheid South Africa. And so if we want to insist that apartheid South Africa was not a period where black people were free, if constructs of apartheid South Africa continue even post-1994, then the logic dictates that, therefore, people born even post-1994 themselves become victims to some degree, or I don't even want to use the word victims, but they become products of an unfree society. So I use the term almost as an irony. For me, having it as the title of my book is it's a play with irony. But the book in its entirety rejects the notion, and basically, from the very first page right up to the last page, it debunks the entire notion and rejects the concept.
Your uncle Godfrey was a prominent figure in your early life. Can you share a little more about your uncle Godfrey and the impact he had on your life?
Look, my uncle died in 1999 in March, on the 30th of March. I was about to turn 8 that year. So my interactions with my uncle, my relationship with my uncle really happened in a very short period of time. I was still very young. But he was a very good human being. He was a very great uncle, certainly. He really cared a lot about us. He would come home and spend time with us and bring us nice things. And we had a very close relationship in spite of the age differences, in spite of the fact that he was not often around. We had a very, very good relationship. It's as good as it gets with an uncle and a very, 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 very young nieces. We were young, so we of course did not talk about a lot of things. We played more than we really talked, but he was a very important person in my life. And for a very, very long time, I did not know that my uncle was a criminal. I didn't. And I think part of the reason why I didn't know is because most of his crimes, in fact all his crimes, were never committed in our township. My uncle was very specific about the fact that he was going to only commit crimes in white neighborhoods and all of that. So in our township, and I think that's why even at his funeral, there were lots of people. There was very great attendance. And I think part of the reason was because, what Godfrey was to the police and what Godfrey was to the neighborhood and the township are two different things. In our neighborhood, Godfrey was a very respectful young man. Godfrey was a caring young man who, if he was, walking on the streets and he saw an elderly person carrying heavy groceries, would, assist them and things like that. He was that person in our township. It's only when he went to do his own things outside the township that he became, this criminal, this person who would, kill people and things like that. So I think I got exposed to the side of Godfrey that most other people got exposed to in our township. A very caring person, a very good human being, a very generous person. But of course, he had his other side. He was also a notorious criminal in his circles, notorious in the circles of people who were committing heists and robberies and all of that in white. Like I said, mostly it was in white neighborhoods. And he, of course, he he lived by the sword, it only made sense that he would die by the sword. I think that despite the fact that he was a criminal, despite the crimes that he had committed, despite how he died and everything else, if you had gotten to know my uncle, you would probably agreed with me that he was quite a very good person. It's really very unfortunate that he believed that a life of crime would be the only way out of our situation. I do understand why he would have thought something like that, primarily because I do understand why so many black people commit crime in our country even today. For the privileged and the elite, crime is often dismissed as a function of people who have nothing better to do. It's never really analyzed, and it's so the socio-political and the economic implications, and implications, as well as the fact that often crime is a product of people just wanting to have a better life in a society that continues to reject them, in a society that is constructed in such a way that for some people privilege continues to be a far-fetched dream.
In your book, you detail two very different classroom experiences. The one was with Mistress M, your history teacher at your township primary school, and the other was with Mrs. M, your Afrikaans teacher at your formal Model C mixed race primary school, Melpark Primary School. Can you reflect on these stories and what lessons you draw now looking back?
One of the things Mrs. M, the first Mrs. M, when I was in primary school, was at Simologo Primary School. I think that experience, when I look at it now, it in very many ways it infuriates me. It infuriates me because I feel that is a point where it's actually a point where I can pinpoint the uneducation of the miseducation of a black child begins there. That experience for me speaks about the miseducation of a black child more than anything else. And I'll tell you why I say this. I speak about how, for example, that particular experience is about, I narrate the story about how we were asked to name the premiers in our country, ministers, and all of those things, right? And so we did the minister of what, the premier of this, the minister of education, all of those kinds of things. Of course, she hit the entire class because we all couldn't get the answer correctly and all of that. And in the end, she said something along the lines of, you people, you don't even know that it's Professor Kara Asmal. This man was, the ANC has brought this man to our country. They take our country seriously. That's why you've got such a powerful minister of education and all of that. And just that entire experience of my primary school at Simologo Primary School, I speak about how it was always about everything either had to do with the ANC or with Mandela. ANC, Mandela, and that was it. And for me, I say it's a miseducation of a black child because it robbed us of an opportunity to learn the truth about our struggle. It robbed us of an opportunity to know that there were other key role players in our struggle outside of Nelson Mandela and the ANC. And even when Nelson Mandela was spoken about from my primary school years, he was spoken about almost as if he was this messiah, this one individual who existed in a vacuum. He had no relationship with ordinary masses on the ground. He even had no relationship with the ANC. It does not speak about, where Nelson Mandela is spoken about. And I see that narrative even continues today. And that's why I say it infuriates me, because I see its ramifications even today. How Nelson Mandela has been, elevated to this figure of a messiah. How he's been elevated above even the ANC. And for me, that is problematic. It's problematic because it's false. It's false that Nelson Mandela was this extraordinary human being who brought us freedom. Nelson Mandela did not bring us freedom. He couldn't, even if he wanted to. He did not do anything on his own. He did not do anything that he was not mandated to do by the ANC. Nelson Mandela was a leader of the ANC. He was not a leader of himself. Nelson Mandela was a liberation. He was a freedom fighter, like many other freedom fighters. And in that sense, I feel that, Mrs. M committed a serious injustice by wanting to portray the ANC as the only liberation movement, the only one that brought us freedom. We are where we are. We are able to have an educated minister because of the ANC. It was not because of the ANC. I feel that the role of ordinary black people who fought against the struggle, who fought in the struggle, and the role of other liberation movements, your PACs, your AZAPOs, and all of that, was completely, wiped out from the history books with Mrs. M in Melpark Primary School. I suppose the incident you're speaking about is the incident where she cried about her dog or something like that. Look, for me, it was strange. It continues to be strange even now. there are some things I don't think I'll ever get to understand about white people, and one of them is this close attachment that they have to their animals and their pets and all of that. I mean, I grew up in a Soweto where we had stray dogs running around everywhere. No one cared if they were fed and things like that. And then I go to a multiracial school, and here's a teacher who walks into a classroom and she's crying, and the brouhaha is about a dog having gone missing or something like that. I don't know. I still to this day can't get. I mean, look, I mean, I've grown up now. I suppose I do have a bit of an understanding about why someone would be so attached to their dog and all of that. But to a point where you become so emotional that a dog has gone missing, I don't know. For me, I call it a white tendency. And I mean, a lot of people, of course, will dismiss me as this very racist person because, of course, the word racist is thrown around very liberally and very glibly. I don't believe blacks can be racist, of course. And someday I'll explain it to you. But I hold a very strong belief that blacks can't be racist. We are anything else but racist. But I don't know. I think Mrs. M continues to be, she was my first real direct contact with the thinking of many white people in very many ways, not just that experience with her dog and things like that, but even with some of the stuff that she would say in the class. I don't think she was racist. I honestly don't think she was racist, but I think like most white people, she was because she had been socialized into her own thinking, a very wide type of thinking. She would say things that she does not realize, and even maybe I would not realize until much later but there was an element of racism in some of the things that you were saying. But of course you would not, you did not realize that. She would make, I don't think it's, like I say, I don't think she was being deliberately racist. I don't think she was being deliberately patronizing or things like that. But she had, elements where she would be. Like, I mean, I think maybe the way even I reacted to her dog having gone missing, even the way she reacted, I mean, her anger, I don't think was an anger so much that I laughed, but an anger that I was probably not understanding her, that I was not very sensitive to her white tendencies. And perhaps maybe I wasn't. Like I said, because I was not raised in that world where dogs go missing and it's suddenly a very big deal. Our backgrounds dictated that the same situation, we reacted to it differently. If I had been the one who had had a dog missing, it would have just been a dog, it's gone, it's not a human being. But white people tend to react very differently to things. And I don't know if how that experience felt to me or anything. For me, it was just, I think one of the first experiences I had with how different, to some degree, white people and black people view things and the things that we value. Maybe because, I carried this kind of thinking with me even now at Rhodes, where I see, for example, some white kids studying philosophy as a major, philosophy and dance or philosophy and drama, and I'm thinking very few black children would do that, because for us, being at school and studying is about doing a subject where you are guaranteed to get a job because you must go back and fix things at home, take your siblings to school and all of that. But for white kids, most of them, for them studying philosophy, even though there's no job that really requires you to have studied philosophy and things like that, for them they do it because it's something nice, it's something they love, and they don't have to worry about getting jobs and things like that. Like I said, number one, because their white skin still guarantees them privilege, but also because they're probably trust fund babies. They've got trust funds stashed somewhere. So even if they go and study drama and dancing, or I don't know, some of these things that we can't relate to as black people because we think there's no jobs in these kinds of things, for them it's I don't know. So I think it's our backgrounds, our economic realities that dictate also the things what we prioritize, what we are sensitive about, what we study, how we react to certain things.
At 18, you enrolled at Stellenbosch University, but left 3 weeks into the semester. Years later, you enrolled at Rhodes University, where you currently are, and I quote, determined to rewrite the narrative of Native identity and to focus on the working class student. Can you take me through that very different paradigm shift from Stellenbosch University to when you enrolled last year at Rhodes University?
Stellenbosch was a very, very miserable experience for me. I hated everything about that institution. I hated it from the minute I walked in. I knew that there was something quite not right about that space. It was not for me. My high school was a multiracial institution, in theory. in practice, there were actually lots of blacks and 2 whites here and all of that. And so it wasn't really a multiracial in a sense of the ratio of the different races that were at our school would probably indicate that there were possibly 98% blacks, or maybe 90% blacks, 8% coloreds, 1% white, 1% Indian. So it was not a school where you would get exposed to a lot of whites or a lot of Indians and things like that. So I had never been, even with Mel Park, there were white teachers, there were white students and all of that, but blacks continued to be in the majority. So I had never, until Stellenbosch, ever been in an environment where not only were whites in the majority, but where they were in the majority and they were speaking this Afrikaans language that I can't identify with, and that for me has got a lot of political history attached to it, which has always been a bit of a problem to me. When I think about it now, I actually prefer Stellenbosch to Rhodes, and I'll tell you why. It's because Stellenbosch was openly racist. You see, Stellenbosch, they were openly racist. They didn't bend over backwards. They didn't try to accommodate you. They spoke Afrikaans. They walked around in their circles, and it was just whites there, and few blacks would sit there in their corner. You knew your place at Stellenbosch. And maybe that's better because you are very clear if you're going to fight, what's your enemy. You can pinpoint what is racism at Stellenbosch. You can say you are racist because you don't accommodate us. You speak your language and you don't make it a point to accommodate us. You can say you are racist because you hang around on your own. You are racist because you do ABC. So you can pinpoint the racism at Stellenbosch. As a result of that, you've got something to fight. Whereas Rhodes is a completely different reality. At Rhodes, it's everybody gets along. Black kids, white kids, holding hands, working together. It's all hunky-dory. And so when we speak about racism at Rhodes, it becomes more difficult for someone to understand, because once you say Rhodes is racist, they're going to say, but how is it racist? Blacks and whites chill together. Blacks and whites, get along at Rhodes. Why would you say it's racist? But the racism at Rhodes is it's not very overt as it is with Stellenbosch. It's very subtle. It's very subtle racism. It's whites patronizing you. It's white people making you feel as if, you ought to feel privileged to be at Rhodes. Whereas at Stellenbosch, they made it clear you don't belong here. What we are waging at Rhodes is a class struggle. You can't say that someone must be neutral about the fact that some kids have and some kids don't, about the fact that some kids are on NSFAS and some kids are not, and those who are on NSFAS are the ones who often even do get excluded from school, or those kids who are on NSFAS cannot access certain things. So, I think that Rhodes for me, and I say that it forces us then to redefine our identity, because it forces us as black people to be able to say that even in these spaces that we want to think are race neutral, there is racism. How do we define ourselves in these kinds of spaces? How do we as black students get to a Rhodes where we are made to feel that we belong? We are made to feel that, it's fine, we get along. How do we maintain our blackness in these kinds of institutions? How do I as Malaika not assimilate into the need to put on weaves, to speak in a particular way, to do things that will assimilate me into whiteness? How do I maintain my identity in that kind of a space?